So you know what you need to do. You likely even want to do it, but somehow it never fucking happens. You've had start networking on your kill list for 3 months. You know outreach would work, but you haven't sent a single message in weeks. And here's what makes this particularly painful for you. You're not ignorant. You probably know more than most people around you. You've consumed the content, you've read the books, you've listened to the podcasts. You're likely a fucking information sponge because that's what ADHD type brains do. We hunt for new information constantly. And that's why knowledge is very rarely ever the gap for us. But here's the thing that likely keeps you up at night. You're watching people who know less than you do far better than you. They're getting results that you're not getting. They're building businesses that you're not building. And they're executing on ideas that you thought of 2 years ago. And let's be honest, that's not just frustrating. That's existentially maddening. Because being intelligent and stuck is far worse than just being ignorant. At least ignorance has an excuse. You know exactly what needs to happen. You just can't seem to make yourself do it. And with that, I welcome you to the intention-action gap. This is the space between what you intend to do and what you actually do. And if you've got an ADHD type brain, the gap between those two places is essentially the size of the Grand Canyon. You see, I speak to people every single week who tell me that they know what they need to do. They're just struggling to get themselves to do it. And they say it like that's a complete thought. The knowing and the wanting is somehow enough, but it's not. That's actually the easy part. The hard part, and ultimately the part that actually matters, is the execution, the implementation, doing the fucking thing. And for ADHD type entrepreneurs, this is the central problem to your entire business. You have more knowledge than you would ever need. You are highly intelligent, and you've likely been told that your entire life, but you're still in the same position that you were 6 months ago, or maybe even a year ago, or even 3 years ago. Because let me tell you a bitter pill that you'd likely need to swallow. Knowledge without execution is just expensive entertainment. So let's get crystal clear about something. Motivation isn't the problem. That's the bit that confuses most people. For example, you're motivated to do outreach. You know it would bring in clients and grow your business. Therefore, the intention is there. But intention alone obviously doesn't provoke that behavior. Otherwise, you'd be doing it. And especially not for ADHD type brains that already struggle with executive function and initiating tasks that require a certain element of willpower. So what does bridge that gap between intention and doing the actual thing? Well, that's specificity. Because when you anchor a specific behavior to a time, a mood, or a location, you give your brain a catalyst moment. Some might call it a trigger. This is when I do the thing signal that doesn't require you to remember or summon discipline out of thin air. Now, when I talk to my clients about this, they understand this on an intellectual level. They nod along. They agree that yes, specificity is the answer. But here's what usually happens next. When I then ask them, right, so what are we gonna do this week? They'll say something along the lines of, I'm gonna crack on with outreach this week. And I'll say something along the lines of, cool. Tell me exactly when. And they usually pause and stare into space because their brain, like mine, naturally defaults to this wishy-washy sense of when they're going to get things done. It usually just tells them that they'll fit it in somewhere. I'll get it done when I have time. And my job by being in their corner is to push back on that. I get them to tell me exactly what day, what time, what happens right before you do the thing. And even with clients that I've been working with for a long period of time, I still have to constantly remind them of this. Because naturally, our ADHD type brains resist any form of rigidity or structure. We push back against it automatically because it feels constraining. It feels like we're losing freedom, flexibility, or creativity, which are the things that our brains naturally crave. But without some element of structure, it is just pure chaos. And in pure chaos, nothing gets done. Now, before I tell you what this looked like for me personally, I want to dive into a little bit of psychology as to why this is likely continuously happening for you. Because understanding why your brain works the way it does will help you to stop trusting your intentions. So here's the first thing that I need you to understand. When you're planning out your weeks on a Sunday evening or a Monday morning, your brain has an optimism bias about your future self. You imagine a version of yourself with unlimited mental bandwidth, a future version of you that is quote unquote more disciplined, more focused. You picture this mythical version of yourself that is going to remember to do outreach, who will definitely prioritize the important over the urgent. But that person doesn't exist. Your Tuesday self has the same brain as your Monday self, the same challenges, the same distractions, the same chaos. But Monday you doesn't account for that. Monday you is in planning mode, which is calm, organized, and highly, highly optimistic. Now on to the second thing. When you set an intention, it feels good. There's a natural dopamine hit that we get from deciding that we're gonna do something. Your brain interprets that feeling as making progress. And what we often do is confuse understanding what we have to do with having already done it. So intention gives you the satisfaction without actually doing the work. And your brain thinks the job is partially done without even starting it. And this is why we can feel so productive after a planning session, even though we haven't actually done anything yet. The intention itself tricks your brain into believing that you're already on the pursuit of progress. And on to the third thing, which is critical for ADHD type brains. Future time is abstract and vague. When you say on Sunday evening, I'll do it this week feels like unlimited space. It naturally feels like you have all the time in the world. But by Wednesday, that same week feels extremely cramped and chaotic. And that's because those of us with these brain types don't perceive time accurately. Monday you thinks there's plenty of time in the week. Thursday you is drowning and has no idea where all of the time has gone. And this is something that most ADHD type brains suffer with, and it's called time blindness. And it means that you can't trust your brain to accurately estimate when you're going to have the capacity to do something. Now let me be clear. It's not that you're lazy, you're broken, or you're undisciplined. It's that you're operating on a faulty assumption. You're assuming that your brain works like a reliable filing system where you can deposit an intention and trust that it will resurface whenever it's needed. But the reality is, your brain is more like a chaotic newsroom. Everything is urgent and competing for your attention. And without a specific external cue, that intention is just going to get buried. And I say that from first-hand experience, believe me. So let me tell you what this looked like for me before I figured this out for myself. I would start every week with a decent set of intentions. I'd have a long list of things that I wanted to accomplish. Things that were genuinely important and would move the needle inside of my business. And I'd think that having that North Star, that general direction would be enough. I'd tell myself that this week I want to get these things done. And then I'd go flying off into my week. And then immediately everything would start to seem incredibly urgent because my ADHD type brain naturally struggles to organize and prioritize. So without specific anchors, everything feels equally important. So as a result, I'd get sucked into the busybody work, responding to messages, answering emails, putting out fires, basically just handling whatever felt urgent in that moment. And I'd get to Friday where I do my end of week review and I'd realize something horrific. I didn't do any of the things I intended to do that week, not a single one. And worse, I'd completely forgotten that any of them existed until I looked back at my notes and I saw them staring at me. And this is exactly what I just explained. I was operating on a faulty assumption about how my brain worked. As I said, I thought setting the intention was enough. I thought my future self would naturally have the capacity and would remember to do it, but none of that was true. My brain could not be trusted to hold those intentions. And that's because ADHD type brains aren't built to passively remember and organize over time. We categorically need external triggers. We need something outside of our mind to remind ourselves. So once I understood this, I started anchoring my behaviors to specific triggers. And that completely changed everything when it came to my consistency and output in work. So let me give you a quick example. I finish every day with something called a daily debrief. So this is a habit that I follow and I get my clients to follow where we just review the day that's passed and we'll typically then set out the intentions for the following day. Now I know the importance of doing this. So I've anchored this specifically to the moment before I get into bed. And the action of getting into bed is my reminder. You see, now I don't have to remember to do my debrief. My brain recognizes getting into bed as the trigger. Getting into bed equals doing the daily debrief. And as a result, I have been consistent with that habit for a number of years now, without having to rely on motivation. Now here's another example. I anchor my workouts to just before lunch. Not sometime today when I feel like it, but specifically before lunch. So whenever I start to feel that hunger pang, or I see a certain time on the clock, that is my cue to go and work out. And I'll give you a third example because I like you so much. I do all of my content creation on Mondays. I don't do it when inspiration strikes, I do it on Mondays. Just like Taco Bell has Taco Tuesdays, I have content creation Mondays. Doesn't quite have the same ring though, does it? But this works because the external triggers that I've just mentioned remind my brain of the action that it needs to be doing, not my brain having to remind itself to do those actions, if that makes sense. Now here's why this is so powerful. Our executive function is already working overtime just to try and control the chaos that's naturally happening inside of our heads. So we can't afford to rely on it to also remember to do the things that we need to do. So instead we have external anchors to do that for us. These act as specific triggers that tell our brains this is the moment. They're not some vague intentions, but I do this every night at 6 p.m. Or I do this after every morning coffee. Or I do this every Monday morning. By using specificity, it removes decision fatigue. Your brain doesn't have to decide when it should do the things because you've already decided beforehand. It just has to recognize the trigger that you've put in place and then execute. So when you anchor a behavior to a specific trigger, you're essentially creating a shortcut for your brain. You're bypassing that part of the brain that needs to remember, prioritize, and decide. And instead, you're creating an automatic association. Trigger equals behavior. Your brain doesn't have to think about it. And this is why those three psychological factors that I was talking about earlier don't actually matter anymore. You're no longer relying on your brain to be optimistic about your future self. You're not relying on the dopamine hit from setting intentions to trick yourself into thinking that you've made progress. And you're not relying on your brain to perceive time accurately. What you're doing is creating an external cue that your brain was missing. The trigger that therefore means that you don't require any of those things. Now to prove that this is legit and actually a thing, I want to tell you about something. Businesses have been doing this forever in their marketing because they understand how anchoring works. Snickers with "You're not you when you're hungry." They've anchored a product to their mood state of their consumer. When hunger strikes, they want you to think of Snickers. That isn't an accident. They've used strategic anchoring here. They're giving your brain a specific trigger. But we can take that same principle and apply it to your own business behaviors. You too can anchor your content creation to a certain time in the week. You can anchor your daily outreach that you need to do to your morning coffee. You can anchor your admin tasks to the last thing you do on Fridays before you close your laptop for the weekend. Like I said, the key here is specificity. The more specific the trigger is, the more reliable the behavior is going to be. Now, like I said, even my long-term clients continuously need reminding of this. And that's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's because the natural default for a brain like ours is to resist structure because it feels a little bit rigid. It feels like we're maybe losing an element of that spontaneity. But what we're actually going to be losing is the chaos that is silently destroying your business. And what we're going to be gaining is consistent execution, results, progress, the things that we've been intending to do for months, but we've not actually been doing. So here's what I suggest that you do this week. Pick one behavior that you keep intending to do, but never actually do. And I'm talking just one, not five, not a complete life overhaul, which I know you'll be tempted to do. One single thing. Then I want you to anchor it to a specific time, place, or a mood state. Make it so specific that when, let's say, that time arises, your brain has no choice but to recognize it. And I'd highly recommend that you write it down like this. I will behavior when trigger. For example, I will do my weekly review on Friday at 4 p.m. before I close my laptop for the week. As I said, the more specific, the better. And then put it into your calendar. Don't let it linger in the air like some vague intention. Put it in as an actual calendar block. Because one thing that I've noticed for myself, if it isn't in my calendar, it basically doesn't exist. And this is how you bridge the intention-action gap. Not with more motivation, not with more discipline, and definitely not with more knowledge. With specificity. With external triggers that your brain can recognize without having to actually remember. And the reality is, this is how people who know less than you are consistently doing more than you. It isn't because they're smarter. It's not because they're more motivated. It's because they have a system in place that is currently working for their brain, and you likely do not. Now, one thing that I also recognize for people who put this into place is they still struggle to consistently execute on the task itself. And that's because the task itself isn't designed around their brain. Well, I've created a video that's going to walk you through how you can redesign tasks in your business to fit your brain type so you don't have to keep constantly fighting it. Click on the video and I'll see you there.